Previously on Merit Musings, Mystery...
We're just going to skip over this part. If you haven't been keeping up, feel free to go back to part 1 through 4 and hear what you missed. But we got to speed this up. So now, on with the show. Wild Wilderness Petting Zoo was tucked all snuggly-puggly in the middle of town. A jungle oasis amongst the tall scrapers and busy streets. The scene of our crime. Mr. Chamomile had walked 75 feet from the gate when the large Buick ran him down. Not stopping, it drove past a small group of horrified onlookers and disappeared. Some of his blood could still be seen, dry and black. The park was closed Fridays, merely an inconvenience. I had broken into more difficult places in the past. In my line of work, sometimes you have to bend the law to your needs. I followed the fence that surrounded the grounds until I found a spot I could climb up and over with little difficulty. Okay, a lot of difficulty, but at least it didn't have barbed wire at the top. I hate that. Jumping down into a lush thicket, I came out facing, nice kitty, pretty kitty. A massive Bengal tiger licked its chops and blew me kisses. This wasn't a problem either. I took out my really big bullets and loaded them into... Oh, damn it. I only had the big gun. The really big bullets didn't fit. Yellow alert, Mr. Sulu. Shields increased to half power. Between roars, the tiger was actually purring. This was good. A friend of mine once owned a cat. It purred. She told me it meant the kitty was happy. The operative word here is once. The cat also yowled at all hours and shredded her prized furniture, manicuring its nails. I hadn't seen it in years. Red alert, full shields, impulse power. I did, at that moment, what my survival instinct instructed. What years of fight or flight experience had firmly implanted within me. I ran. Warp factor 7. Ran blindly. Like I was Usain Bolt, and this was my final moment of glory. Branches swatted my face. Footing was difficult on the jungle floor. The kitty cat chomped at my heels and breathed on my neck. The beast did not falter. But I did. Face first into a hippo pond filled with lily pads and that goopy, mucky stuff that makes you gag. The tiger backed off now that its meal was covered with disgusting gravy. A hippo attacked, but I managed to swim to the farthest shore and scramble onto the gravel beach. Did you know that hippos kill more people than any other animal on the planet? What kind of petting zoo is this? And why was I here? Ah, yes. The pachyderms. After a scurry over an electrical fence, ouch, I came upon them. Majestic, four-legged hills that made the ground shudder when they moved. Their calls like thunder. Or nails on a chalkboard, you decide. They have the largest eyelashes possible, quite endearing. What was Mr. Chamomile's fascination with these creatures? India's tractor-trailer, Africa's nanny, pilfered and hunted to near extinction for their ivory tusks. The largest...
Hey, you!
It was a good thing I was wet, smelly, and covered in pond goo.
The zoo isn't open today. You can't be here. I'll be fired if you're found. Who are you?
I told him.
The CIA? No way. What kind of secret operation?
This was going to be too easy. Do you know Herbert Chamomile?
Mr. C? Oh, yeah. Everyone in the park knows him. Knew him. He had a really bad accident. The elephants sure miss him. He would bring treats every day. Hey, is that why you're here?
Don't tell anyone. Highly classified. Homeland Security may be at risk. Whoa. Do you know his wife, Florence?
Mrs. C was always really quiet. She wasn't with him often, and she would just stay in the car. On the day he was run down, she did show up for a bit, but left early. Maybe an hour before he did the bumper biting.
How did she leave?
On foot, I guess. I would know if a cab had shown up, and they only had one car.
Did you notice a change in Mr. Chamomile in the weeks leading up to the hit and run?
He would dress like it was winter still. Big coat, scarf, and hat. Said he had chills he couldn't get rid of.
I gave the kid $1 for his troubles. He showed me out through the gate and suggested I shower before going out dancing. The parking lot was oddly quiet. I started to make my way to where I'd stashed my bike. That's right. I like to pedal. I heard tires squeal. Headlights barreled down on me. I pulled out my big gun and threw it at the windshield. It struck. The car swerved and crashed into one of the large trees dotted amongst the stalls. I rushed the wreck, pulling open the driver's door. Sam slumped forward, bleeding. I pulled him out, his eyes rolled up in his head. I checked his vitals and ripped open his shirt to administer CPR. Oh my, what are those? The young kid had heard the crash, and I told him to call for help. The ambulance and police came. Sam would live. I gave my statement, found my bike, and rode back to my office to put all the twisted pieces of the case together. The next morning when I cracked my eyes open, the sun was bright and my tongue felt like a bag of cotton balls. An empty bottle of scotch lay beside me. On the desk and the walls were all my notes of the case. Scribblings that to anyone else wouldn't make any sense at all. I gathered them up, scraped the cotton from my mouth, and headed back to the hospital. The nurses wouldn't let me in until I had showered and changed. Fair enough. An hour later, I was back and looking like a breath mint. They had put Sam in Mr. Chamomile's room. How convenient. Turns out in the crash, the airbag in the steering column hadn't deployed properly, and Sam had ingested its CO2 cartridge. He was booked for surgery that afternoon. It was Sam I wanted to talk to first, so I stirred him from his slumber. Hello, Florence.
Detective.
The truth fell into place the moment I ripped Sam's shirt open the night before. I didn't know where to place my hands. Here's your 5,000 back. You need a shrink, not a gumshoe.
You saw the room in our apartment. I had to kill you.
What are you afraid of?
Myself.
She started to cry. Now stay with me here. You say she was the one who tried to kill her husband. Even though she pretended to hire someone else, it was actually herself she hired. And then she hired me to hunt down herself, posing as someone else. As Sam, she had gotten all wrapped up in the underworld at Butcher's Emporium, seduced by the dark side, as it were. A bored housewife, living the life of an international weaponry hobbyist. She fit right in. She even made the poker game every Thursday afternoon. Her husband was spending more time at the zoo, and by what I had seen at their apartment, in that room, fantasizing more as well. There was enough space between this couple, you could have parallel parked an entire stack of elephants with no problem. But why kill him? A divorce would have had the same result. No, it was what I saw in that other room that gave me dark insight to all this. She was going to jail. And for what?
Florence, is that you?
Mr. Chamomile had pulled himself up just enough to get a good look at her.
What do you know, Dumbo?
I could almost tell he was smiling beneath his bandages. Florence coughed and let out some CO2.
It is you, my darling. I missed you.
I pushed Florence's bed beside his and stepped outside the room to give them some much-needed space.
A person's a person, no matter how small.
Not that Mr. Chamomile was tuned into any local radio stations, if you know what I mean. I gave them 20 minutes before walking back in. Herbert lay still, facial bandages removed. He was quite dead. I knew because the really important machine was going beep. Florence stood at the window. It had started to rain outside, and the ripples on the glass made it look like she was crying. It was over. I gave her a hug and called security. Was it done out of love? Only Florence knows. But I've a hunch it was. You see, what I saw inside that room was a complete do-it-yourself plastic surgery setup. Herbert had become an enthusiast. That's why the doctor hadn't recognized him, why he wore winter clothing. The room was littered with photos of his transformation, his becoming. The closer he got to being an elephant, the farther apart he and Florence became. The more he snipped, tucked, and stretched, the faster he lost his mind. Florence wanted to save something of her husband's original self, be it mere memory. Herbert was an elephant trapped inside a human body. Herbert had become Horton. Florence understood that, but she couldn't live with it. She held out a mitt full of bills.
Take all the money. You did your job. Thank you.
No one has ever paid me to send them to jail. It didn't feel so bad. She wouldn't need it where she was going anyway. Turns out the heart monitor was just broken, and Herbert sleeps with that kind of expression on his face. Florence was off the hook for murder. They came and cuffed her, took her away, and in 3 years for good behavior was back out. Now she owns a vintage clothing store downtown called Second Skin. Herbert was crated up and flown to Africa, to one of those really fancy nature parks. Poachers shot him a year later, and he now stands stuffed outside a cigar shop in Kenya. As for me, I spent my money on a new office, a few more square feet for couch and water cooler. Still no AC. Cases roll in as crime never takes a holiday. I occasionally visit the petting zoo and flash pictures of Herbert at the elephants. It livens them up, and the tourists seem to like that. I still haven't found anything to pet in there.